Greg thought it was an interesting experience, but not, well, not something he wanted to do on a too regular basis. So in 82 and 83 he played quite a bit. In 1984 he was selected for the first time in the Australian Olympic team for Thessaloniki in 1984. But before that Olympiad, he'd finally given it a go as a chess professional. So about March of that year, he'd headed off overseas, maybe April, and he was playing some big events. So this was the only time Greg Hjorth really became a proper chess professional. So he went to the New York Open, he played the Aura tournament in Amsterdam, he played in Ostend, he played the British Championship, and I think he played 6 events altogether, and in 4 of them he got a performance rating at or close to 2500. Now that may not sound a lot nowadays, but back then without rating inflation, it would be the equivalent of playing about 2650 in modern rating terms. So they were very impressive performances. Now, Kathy and myself ran into him in Aura in Amsterdam. We dropped in to see him play in the tournament. We really struggled to find a decent place to stay. Eventually we got a dive on the dam rack, the mainstays, and we came to the tournament hall. Greg finished his game. We had dinner, we started chatting with him, and we explained that we'd had real problems getting a hotel, and he said he'd found a really terrific place not far from where we indicated our hotel was. So we decided to go back to his hotel, and it turned out his hotel was the same as ours. It's just perspective was different. So he was quite happy with the dodgy looking characters renting by the hour and so on, and we thought it really wasn't the greatest place. Anyway, so if you're in Amsterdam, drop into the Hotel Manofa, it's still there. And you be the judge. Anyway, Greg's first event was the New York Open, so I might have a look at that, because the round 1 of the New York Open was one of those sort of breakthrough games that indicated to not just Australia, but also many others that he was a real player. So in the first round, he was up against the American Grandmaster Robert Byrne. Now, Byrne was an established top player. He had actually got as far as the candidates matches in the 1970s, eventually being knocked out by Boris Spassky. He remained one of the very top American players, though I guess he was burned off, if you like, by Bobby Fischer. His generation couldn't really keep up with Fischer, but certainly was very strong. He also had a big reputation as the chess columnist of the New York Times, and he held that post for decades, annotating top games from around the world, so he was always well versed in opening theory. So he was by far the higher rated player in the game against Greg, and well, certainly expected to win the game, if not also the tournament. So Greg started with E4. Byrne played the Sicilian, as most people did against Greg, and then he played B3. Before I look at this, I should also mention that Greg was starting to play B3 with great regularity. He I think he developed this taste when he went first to the World Junior Championship in Dortmund in 1980. For a long time this was considered one of the strongest ever World Junior Championships. In that tournament, Garry Kasparov won, Nigel Short came in second, and Greg came around 6th. But if he had beaten Short in the final round, he would have come second. So he was right up there. He drew with Short in the final round. He was right up there. In fact, Greg played in 3 World Juniors in 1980, 81 and 82, and I think his worst placing was 11th, which this is the World Under-20 Championship, and I think that is equal to anybody else's best placing in the World Junior. So he was extremely impressive in the World Junior Championships, and he won quite a few games with this. I think there was one game he played in the World Junior in Dortmund that went something like bishop takes, pawn takes, queen here, and his confused opponent really didn't know what was going on. It's not your normal Sicilian position, and yeah, I think Greg even got around to threatening mate sometime, but just got his pieces out. And actually no, he swapped off this bishop for a knight at some point, so he was playing with the two knights against the two bishops, and the two knights did really well. Anyway, he was so successful with b3 that he even managed to convince both myself and Darragh Johansson to play this on occasion, though we almost always regretted it, whereas he had really good results with it. Anyway, Byrne played knight c6, very normal, bishop b2. No, that's not very normal. Okay. Bishop b2, e6, knight f3, and now knight f6. Now actually this line I think has been played subsequently by Judith Polgar, but she played the sensible looking knight d5. Byrne played the quite weird knight g4. So it would be relatively easy just to play h3, knight back g4. And I'm really not sure why Greg didn't play it, but it's probably related to the flying high theory. That's just what he'll be expecting me to do. And therefore he went for g3 instead. And with the idea of bishop h3, I don't know what the bishop's doing on h3, but Greg decided that that looked good, and so he did it. Bishop e7, bishop here, and I think Byrne must already have been wondering what his opponent was doing, because he now played h5, which is really not necessary. The knight could just go back, and the bishop is just silly on h3. It'll have to come back to g2 later. But okay, he played h5, probably thinking, well, my opponent's not very good, so I'm not too worried. So castles, b6, and now Greg starts playing really well. He was extremely undogmatic in that he would adjust to a new situation and play the position he had rather than the one he'd like to have had. So here he just played bishop g2 because he'd come to the conclusion very quickly that the bishop wasn't very good on h3. And certainly on the long diagonal it makes a lot of sense. So here, d4, and Byrne gets a bit careless now. He should just take here, maybe, and then maybe rook c8 or something like that. He'll be doing fine. But he played queen c7, and all of a sudden d5 turns out to be very strong. Pawn takes, and now not taking back, but playing knight here. Now the knight is headed for b5 or d5, and both of those squares are going to be very annoying. In the end, Byrne decided to hang on to the pawn. Now, perhaps he shouldn't have, but it's hard to find a really good move here. It turns out, at this position, queen back, I think he now plays c3, pawn takes, bishop takes. And this turns out to be a position remarkably similar to the sort of pawn sacrifice that you get in modern games in a line of the Queen's Indian defence. That you don't seem to have much compensation for the pawn except a few squares, but it's really hard for black to play. And in a way, Greg was anticipating what people would find 20, 30 years later, that you really do have a lot of play. One of the things that stood out in Greg's games was the willingness to go a pawn down and just get a bit of initiative, and sometimes it just wasn't worth it. Sometimes his opponent would hang on and Greg's judgment wasn't justified, but a lot of the time he would show that the initiative was really worthwhile. So, okay, here, Byrne played knight b4. Did he really? Yeah, looks like he did. And then suddenly came check.
Why?
Why, exactly? Because pawn takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, check. Yes. So how do you handle check. If the king goes that way, queen d6 looks pretty good. Bishop back, that rook's under attack, so is our queen. What's that? Queen c7 maybe? No, hang on. So let's see, king f8. Looks like it should fall apart. Check, bishop back.
Bishop g7, check
Couldn't.
You could start by taking here if you wanted. Yes.
No.
Why not? Take.
That would just be a lot of
Yeah, that
exchange.
works.
So that would
Take. Then bishop check. Then king here. And e1. Something like that. So, yeah, that looks crushing actually. So that sort of came out of nowhere, that knight f6 check. And I guess by now Byrne was realising that things weren't so easy. He played, he played king f8, knight takes pawn, and I'm sure he was originally intending just to go back with king, sorry, he's thrown these moves in as well. Before the knight f6 check. So the knight wasn't covering f6. My mistake. So here, if he goes king back, the knight is trapped, but you have e6, and then there's bishop takes g7 later. So he actually went this way, and the knight has no way back, but it's very difficult to. This might be too. It's very difficult to trap it. He took the knight. Pawn takes, and just queen d3, and he's going to play rook d1, and the position doesn't look bad at all. White's got the pawn back, and a pretty good position. So Byrne started with a counter-attack, which was rather clever. He plays rook c3, and when the queen moves away, queen a8, putting pressure on the knight on f3. And here's probably the only big mistake that Greg makes in the game. If he had played e6 here, it's more or less a winning attack. The point is that after bishop takes knight, you take on f7, and if you recapture with the king, there'll be a knight e5 check. If you recapture with the knight, then that bishop down there is going to be under attack. Instead, he played knight e1, and now h4, and it's starting to get a little bit double-edged anyway. g4, bishop takes, knight takes, and knight takes here. So White's got a pawn down again. He starts attacking now with e6, and here Byrne commits perhaps the decisive mistake. He needed to keep things blocked, either f6 or f5, and then it's not at all clear that White's attack is going to crash through. Black is remarkably quick at moving the rook out of the way and pushing this pawn. But Byrne decided he could do it even better by playing rook here and threatening pawn up and so on. But after knight f4, h3, it turns out Greg can just go knight d5 and block that diagonal. So pawn check, king in the corner, and even though the knight's pinned, at some point White can play f3, unpin the knight, and Black was going to be in all sorts of trouble. Bishop here, pawn up. Well, you could play queen e8 and block the pawn, but then at least knight takes rook is good. Maybe there are other better moves. So the rook pulls back. But what happened after that? Just f3. Now, because there's no pin, we're threatening knight c7. He tried running away with the king. Check. Queen here, now there's a check here coming up. And really there's no defence anymore. He tried a desperate sacrifice to keep that knight on d5 pinned, but it's hardly likely to be enough. And now, well, rook f7 looks like it's winning, doesn't it? Yeah. It does. But, Well, anyway, he resigned more or less around here. So, yeah, it was a little bit double-edged, but basically White had the initiative for the bulk of the game, and the important thing was Byrne, being a theoretician after b3 on move 2, just had to come up with his own ideas, and Greg's ideas were just as good, and ultimately, well, his calculation turned out better, and he went on to win the game. Later in that tournament, Greg also, for example, drew with Samuel Reshevsky, who was another great name from the past, but admittedly by the 1980s, Reshevsky, who'd been a child prodigy in about 1920 or thereabouts, was getting on a little bit, but even so, was still a very serious player. So this was just one of Greg's really good results. The British Championship, he started extremely well. It included a win against the favourite, Tony Miles, in the 4th round. Guy West, I believe, is going to show you that game. The only sad part about that win is that it was later attributed to Daryl Johansen, because no one had heard of Greg. So the bulletin said, Australian international master Daryl Johansen defeated Tony Miles in the 4th round. So Greg had this thing happening a few times. For example, when he played and lost to Garry Kasparov in the World Junior in a key game in the 9th round in 1980 in Dortmund, when the game was published in the Soviet press, the player of the black pieces turned out to be Vlastimil Hjorth, the Czech grandmaster, who everyone knew played on the level of Kasparov, and nobody had heard of Greg Hjorth. And that actually happened other times in Greg's career, I guess, because when it was translated to Cyrillic, Hjorth and Hjort looked vaguely similar. But in any case, so that was 1984, and well, he came back from that 6 months travelling. He finished with the Olympiad in Thessaloniki. It wasn't a great result. He got, I think, 5 out of 11 or a score like that. It wasn't a bad performance, but it wasn't up to the level of the other ones. And he returned after those 6 months, and I sort of asked it, I congratulated him on the trip, and he said, never again. And I said, what? You played really well. He said, no, didn't like the travelling, didn't like using Dad's credit card all the time, can't see myself doing this. And he basically stopped being a chess professional after then. Already by then he was moving into academia. Well, my last year of university was his first. We were both at Melbourne University, and I decided to do a first year philosophy subject. And Greg was doing first year philosophy in the same class. And at some point I came home to discover that the philosophy lecturer, who was a friend of my mother, was at a dinner party, and I said hello. He sort of recognised that I was in his class, though Melbourne Uni has huge classes, so lecturers don't always remember these things. And he said, you know, I've just marked the best paper I've ever seen written by an undergraduate. And I thought, but then he said, it's by Greg Hjorth. And I thought, pity. But it turned out within a year's time, Greg was transferring to Adelaide and actually studying philosophy in Adelaide. And for a long time, his academic career was a sort of a tug of war between universities who wanted him to study mathematics and universities who wanted him to study philosophy. And he finished up studying something on the borderline of the two, where he sort of imagined mathematical problems and tried to work out if there might be a solution, and rather than actually calculating anything. And ultimately he went to the mathematics side and worked on set theory, but he really wasn't sure for quite a while. There were unis chasing him, and Adelaide did get him for a little while anyway. Ultimately, by the late 80s, he'd moved to the United States, and 86 was his last Olympiad, Dubai, but by then he was hardly playing internationally at all, and in fact both he and Daryl Johansen decided to have a bad Olympiad at the same time, and it wasn't an entirely fun Olympiad with those two not happy. And Greg, well, basically knew that this was going to be his last big event, and he was playing up on board 3, which was the highest he'd been. Yeah, his rating was good, but he just wasn't enjoying the struggle anymore. So he headed overseas. He still played a Dougall Cup or two. I mean, he won 3 Dougall Cups, which it was quite remarkable given the limited number of times he played. But he went over to Northern California. I ran into him in 1991. He had just married. He was living in another hovel, but he thought it was quite nice. He invited me. I was playing in a Grandmaster tournament in the middle of San Francisco, and after he came in after one game, invited me out. He said they'd go to a movie and have a meal, and I knew he was a vegetarian, maybe borderline vegan, so I didn't think I was going to enjoy this too much, and I also realised his choice of movie was going to be something very wimpy. So anyway, he invited me to a nature movie, at least I thought it was a nature movie. It had just been released, called Silence of the Lambs. And sure enough, I came in thinking I was going to be seeing something like a nature movie, and I was sort of pretty shell-shocked by the time it was out. It hadn't quite been what I expected. I'd never heard of the thing. I mean, it really had just been released. But Greg knew what he was in for. And yeah, he was sort of, in Melbourne, he was the sort of the cool one who would go to Nick Cave gigs before anybody had heard of Nick Cave, and would put Nick Cave lyrics in his chess annotations, and he sort of knew what the trends were, and he also had some affectations. You know, he'd go around with a walking stick because he thought it was cool. He'd wear a Union Jack on the inside of his jacket in order to provoke people who thought Australia should be a republic, and he enjoyed himself a bit. But anyway, after that, I really didn't catch up with him. Every so often I saw he was playing a US Open or some tournament like that, but really his chess career had more or less been sacrificed for his academic career. When I saw him, it was just in the early stages of a PhD, which ultimately won some, I think took him 9 years and won him a prize as the best PhD in the field that year. And then he went on to make a number of major discoveries in set theory, which gained international acclaim. I mean, one of the problems when he decided to move back to Melbourne, a few years before he died, in 2010 or thereabouts, was that he really didn't have a peer group over here that he could work with, and he found himself constantly wanting to go back to the US to work with the people he had been working with. So it was quite difficult. But in his last year or so, he did play at Melbourne Chess Club in a couple of tournaments, and he was actually getting back into chess a little bit, and then of course, as most of you know, he had a heart attack in 2011 and died very unexpectedly. He was certainly not very unfit or anything like that. It was just a terrible occurrence. So Greg Hjorth, yeah, you're a bit unlucky that you can't see him in action. He still had something when he came back playing in 2010. But the early games, especially the early 80s, they're really something special. So it's definitely worth pulling out a database and checking out Greg Hjorth games. He was basically, even when he wasn't full-time, he was the number 3 player in the country behind myself and Daryl Johansen for quite a few years, even when the selectors didn't quite work that out. He had far more top scalps as a young player than either Daryl or myself. He just seemed to be able to confuse almost anyone, but he also had real accidents against weaker players, so he wasn't totally consistent. I guess the nearest player you compare him to nowadays would be Badur Jabava, the Georgian player who you're always wanting to watch his games, even when they're a train wreck. And with Jabava, as he's getting stronger and stronger, they're less and less a train wreck, and more often you're seeing him wipe out top players with sacrifices and so on. And Greg was never scared of giving away pieces. So anyway, it would be great to see more Greg Hjorth games, but unfortunately that's not to be. But we've still got a pretty good selection to have a look at now. Tomorrow night, Guy West will have a look at a couple more, and I've also recorded some videos of Greg's games that will be on YouTube sooner or later, and also I believe Darryl Johansson will also be recording some games of Greg's that will go on YouTube soon, so you will be able to see some of his games. So anyway, I might take any questions now on Greg. I'm sure I've skimmed over some key points, but yeah, he's certainly there's certain players are remembered as much for their style as for their results. Greg had both, but his career was remarkably short. But the games that he produced were really rather good. So, yep.
What was it about being a chess professional particularly that he didn't like? I mean, you would know, having been a chess professional yourself, and perhaps Darryl as well. I mean, to most of us, the concept of being a chess professional is a bit alien. So, you know, what was it about that sort of lifestyle that didn't appeal to him?
Well, some people don't like living out of a suitcase. You also have a very mobile set of friends. You see some people at the same tournaments again and again, but he had a group of friends in Melbourne that you lost contact with quite a bit. He felt that it was not a financially wise decision. It wasn't bad being an international master in the 1980s. The organisers would usually pay your accommodation, perhaps some appearance fee, but it was, as an Australian, just to get the air ticket over to Europe was using up a lot of funds. Air tickets at that time were much more expensive in real terms than they are nowadays. So he didn't feel like he wanted to be dependent on his dad's money while he established himself. You've got to remember that Greg was very independent. When his parents split up, he was 15, 16, and he went to live by himself and study for his HSC, living by himself from a very young age. So he'd sort of been independent for a long time, and when he became a chess professional, suddenly he felt like he was a bit dependent on his father again, and that he didn't like the feel of that. So, and I guess he also was quoted, I don't remember ever hearing him say it, that he felt that if he wasn't in the top 100 by the time he was 21, he should give it away. Maybe that's what he thought, but certainly to be a chess professional back in the 80s was a lot easier than nowadays, but you still had to regard it as you would a professional surfer. That is, you were doing it because you loved the game, you were looking to play great games, you weren't looking to become rich, and that you were often financially very, very unstable. And Greg didn't like the feeling of the financial instability, and he didn't enjoy the travelling that much, so it wasn't the life for him. And he did have a few other talents as well, so he didn't fall into the chess player category. Well, that's the only thing I can do, so I better keep playing chess.
Thanks.
Did anyone here know Greg? Apart from Peter, yeah? So, anything I missed out that you regarded as a key Hjorth characteristic? Panis Giotis used to go to chess clubs together with Greg regularly.
It was interesting hearing about the later period, for being later, meaning the early 80s period, because I mainly knew him when he was very young, between sort of like the ages of about 10, 11 to about 15 or so, when he was going to probably at least 3 chess clubs, I think Heidelberg, Melbourne and Waverley, perhaps Box Hill as well. He was, chess was constantly part of his life because his room was pretty much littered with chess books and chess sets.
Yeah.
To play him at home, you usually had to scramble around and make a set of about 3 different sets, but he was always reading chess books. So his knowledge of the game was exceptional.
But everybody back then was reading chess books.
Everybody was.
Because they
But
didn't have computers.
I think Greg read even more than most people.
Yeah.
Maybe not yourself and Darryl, but you know, he read a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And knew all the historic grandmasters, you know. So yeah, I mean he was also just incredibly creative, I think, as a player. I mean, there were lots of players who were quite good, but Greg always had an emphasis on sort of an aesthetic aspect of the game.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which sort of made his games always...
His games, I actually noticed one or two when I was preparing this, that where he could have won, but was setting up an even nicer finish. So he gave up the easy win and went for the pretty one. And yeah, he definitely had an eye for the aesthetic. And though I must admit, when he needed to, I remember one Dobell Cup would have been about mid-80s, where he was a point behind me going into the last round. He had 5 out of 6, and he just needed to beat me, and he just sat down and ground me down in some night-end game. And I'd rarely seen Greg as determined to actually win a game. Normally he would try things, but here he just was willing to outsit me, and he went on to win the game and won the cup on tiebreak. He was capable of playing normal chess when he needed to.
Can we see that one?
What?
Can we see that one?
I guess you.
Go on, yes. I'd like to see him crushing you.
Should never mention.